How's it going, everyone? It's Avi from Weather Storm 1000. Today is August 31st, 2019, as we will be tracking, obviously, Hurricane Dorian, which is several miles to the east of the Florida Peninsula, and it's several hundred miles north of the Haitian and Dominican Republic island. And as you could see, Dorian is very well organized. It's a 150-mile-per-hour hurricane. From the last time I updated you guys, it was down, I think, to a Category 3. Now it has strengthened to an upper end Category 4 and has a potential to reach Category 5 status, which is on the top of the Safari-Simpson scale. And you could see very well organized, although it's a little asymmetrical due to this upper level low that's just to the east of it, shearing a lot of these thunderstorms a little bit more to the east. It isn't enough to stop this storm from really intensifying, as the wind shear is relatively light over the storm, not enough to really shear it apart or disrupt it from intensifying, but it's just enough where we see a little bit of an asymmetrical hurricane. But I do expect that to change. I expect this storm to become slightly more symmetrical as it heads more towards the west, as this upper level low to the east of it will move further and further away from this hurricane, and this storm will start to revolve thunderstorms around the western portion of the eye. And other than that, the dry air is very weak around this hurricane. The dry air isn't really doing anything at this point. There's a little bit of dry air more towards Hispaniola, but it isn't really getting entrained into the eye of this hurricane, which definitely isn't something we want to see, because dry air usually weakens the hurricane. It stops the moisture from heading into the center of circulation, and the dry air usually prevents storms from developing. But unfortunately, we're not seeing much dry air affect this, and the water temperatures are more than warm enough to support hurricane development right around the northern Caribbean to Atlantic Ocean that's just off the coast of Florida. And you could see that it's moving mainly straight. It was taking more of a northwest turn. Now it's starting to turn more straight. But in terms of the future of this, could this reach Category 5 status? I think it definitely could, as this upper level low that's hindering it a little bit, making the storm asymmetrical, maybe limiting it from Category 5 status. But as this hurricane continues to trek on to the west, we could see that we will see that wind shear from the upper level low to the east of it die down, and that could make the storm a little bit more symmetrical for the hurricane to continue to intensify, even a Category 5 hurricane, which definitely isn't good news. We don't want to see that happen. But at the same time, we could see an eye wall replacement cycle that could weaken it in the future, since large, intense hurricanes with very defined eyes usually go through several eye wall replacement cycles, which as a result kind of weaken the hurricane's wind speed, and sometimes hurricanes don't recover from that. But we'll have to see if this goes through any eye wall replacement cycles that could potentially weaken it. But other than that, it seems like there's not much else to really weaken it. But as for the future of this storm, the great news is that the storm is currently expected by a lot of models to just say offshore of the Florida Peninsula, which is good news. However, I don't want people to start over celebrating yet or taking this as gospel just yet, because as you already know, the cone of uncertainty is very uncertain when it comes to forecasting. Only 2/3 of the time hurricanes stay within the projected path of the hurricane, and it could really go anywhere within this track. The most hopeful scenario is that it goes to the more eastern part of this track. It takes the more western part of this projected path, but there's also a possibility it could go through the middle, which affects a lot of the coast still, or it could take the worst case scenario, which I was definitely worried about earlier during the forecast, because it was taking a very slow moving hurricane just over Florida, dumping a lot of rain and wind over those states. But as and it would continue on to bring rain to Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina if it were to take the most western portion of the track. But the forecast models are now favoring a more offshore track to Florida, and it's due to several things. So the first thing is that Hurricane Dorian moved a little slower, which allowed this trough that's currently right around the Great Lakes to come around the East Coast just in time for Dorian to maybe sneak out. And that allowed Dorian to have an area to where it could move north. And also, we have this ridge developing right around Louisiana where its winds are coming from the northwest, which is gonna actually push Dorian a little bit more towards the east, thanks to this onshore wind that's coming from this upper level high pressure system that may be centered over the Gulf of Mexico later during this forecast run. But it's expected to still move slowly due to a lack of steering currents, and the trough isn't big or strong enough to really absorb it and sweep this away. So there's still, even if this does stay offshore, there still could be very strong, there could be still very strong beach erosion and a prolonged period of rain and wind, which is more than you would expect for a hurricane that could just stay offshore. But don't underestimate this just because it may stay offshore Florida, because remember Hurricane Matthew, which made landfall around, well, it didn't make landfall, it was hitting Florida around 3 years ago, and even though that storm stayed offshore, it caused $3 billion in damages to the state of Florida. And this could very well be another Matthew if it does take that track, or it could even be worse, as the track shows that there could be a landfalling hurricane in Florida still, and it's certainly not out of the possibilities. But the key thing to watch over the next several runs is if this storm maintains a straight path or it moves just slight enough to the northwest, because if it takes that west-northwest turn, it's more likely to stay offshore. But if it takes more of a straight track, then Florida should be definitely more worried that there could be a landfall, because if it just stays towards the direction of going west, there could still be a landfall in the state of Florida. And so just because it looks offshore as of right now doesn't mean Florida will be completely spared of impacts, as there's still a lot of uncertainty with the forecast, which I hate to use that word, but forecasting just isn't reliable enough just yet to really define or confine the impacts to one area just yet, and especially 3 days before, because to show an example, like I remember Irma, which made landfall in the western portion of Florida 2 years ago. 3 days before it made landfall, it was supposed to actually head towards the east part of Florida, but instead it took shift 50 miles towards west, which resulted in a huge difference of impact. So just because the track doesn't show anything doesn't mean you'll be spared from the impacts just yet. But North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia still, I think it's definitely more likely to see a landfalling hurricane because of how much it pops out. And after that, there should be, the storm should move to the northeast, like a lot of hurricanes do, away from the northeast. I don't want to bring the northeast up just yet because it's still a little iffy on that forecast, but you could see that the European is taking a landfalling hurricane in North Carolina and South Carolina, and then with the GFS, it's taking a more offshore storm where it's still a point where the Florida might not even experience tropical storm force winds, which is definitely the scenario we want. And there's a possibility this doesn't make landfall on the U.S. mainland at all, which is definitely most wanted. But the key is that whether this hurricane will stay straight or will it continue or will it turn more northward and avoid the U.S. That's going to be the key over the next several runs, and we'll have to see if this continues to strengthen, because if it strengthens, that's definitely worrying. Wherever it could make its landfall, and that's definitely something to keep and watch. And I guess that's about it for this weather report. Thank you guys for watching. In Florida, don't over celebrate just yet because there still could be impacts even if it does stay offshore. Remember Hurricane Matthew in 2016? That storm didn't even make landfall in Florida, but still brought tons of impacts along the coast. And I hope you guys have a good day and remember to stay safe.